Welcome to Sikh Cast, brought to you by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.
Hello, Guru Fateh. Welcome to the Sikh Cast. My name is Manpreet Singh. Thank you for being with us today. Today we have a very special episode. We're going to get to that in a minute. I want to introduce you to our two SikhRI speakers on the podcast today, Harinder Singh and Asha Kaur. Harinder and Asha, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
And our very, very special guest on the podcast today, which we're going to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, is Corey Winchester. Corey, thanks a lot for taking some time out and being on the podcast today.
Thank you. I'm really humbled to be a part of this space.
So Corey, the listeners know Asha, the listeners know Harinder. Before we get into it, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you've been up to.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Philly, and I left Philly at the age of 18 to go to college with the dream to become an educator. And I was able to fulfill that with help of my family and elders and ancestors who came before me to help realize a dream, I think, which is really important. I found that there were spaces within our world where folks like me who are Black and male didn't have these lived experiences that I thought growing up, learning the history of the United States that we should have. And that's really what attracted me to become a teacher. And I've been doing that for 10 years. Asha was actually one of my former students. And one thing that I think is really important about this type of work that we do in community is that our roles are expanding. So Asha is a teacher, and I've learned quite a bit from her over the years. So I'm really humbled to, again, be a part of this space and to share. I've learned quite a bit in my years of teaching.
Great. No, we're glad you're on the podcast. So, let's get into it. We know what's happening across America. I mean, this podcast is worldwide, but in America, everyone's seeing the news of all these protests happening because of the horrible death of George Floyd. And so I'll come to you first, Corey, and then we'll get Harinder and Asha to chime in. But when you saw these protests happening, because they have happened before, but not at this scale. And I guess George Floyd's death was a tipping point, and it's all over the country. It's united so many people. No one's even thinking about COVID right now. Everyone's out on the streets. So when you saw the protests become this big and happening at a scale like this, what was going through your mind?
Well, I gotta say there were two. I think there are two pivotal deaths that have impacted me. The first one was Michael Brown, and then the second one is George Floyd. And the reason being is because after the officer that murdered Michael Brown was not indicted, my mom called me and she was in tears and she said, "There's nothing I can do to protect you." And I think that reality is something that has stayed with me since that phone call back in 2014 or 2015. I don't remember. That was what I think made that particular instance really stand out to me. And I say that because the same thing happened with this particular death, with George Floyd's death. And she had posted on Instagram. My mom is on all the socials. She got a TikTok, she out here. But she posted on, I think it was Facebook, and she was basically like, as a Black mother, this is really hard for me. I think I've been surprised and happy by the responses that I've seen from like the international community. And, I think we have a really important decision to make um, as a society, as a nation, globally, about whether or not we're going to address anti-Blackness.
Great. I want to get Harinder and Asha's quick thoughts on this too, and then I want to turn the conversation into education and what could we do on that angle. So, Harinder first, what were your thoughts when you saw these protests becoming big, and just like Corey said, even worldwide?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So there is COVID happening right now, but I was thinking actually two things. I was thinking this is a week where Sikhs have gone through a 1984 genocide campaign against them, where every Sikh was a target by the Indian government. And at a personal level, so it's that week, so we are looking at deaths, and deaths which are not natural, deaths which are targeted, deaths which are othering a particular minority. In America, it was happening by race. In India at the time, it was happening to Sikhs by religious belief. And us leaving, I remember my dad. I did not have too many conversations with him when this happened, but we left the country within 2 years. And one of the things which he said, which I think many Sikhs felt, those who served the country, in this case, I'll come to America as well, like, this is not my country anymore. People who I engage with, they are coming to kill me and put my house on fire. So, it's very interesting. I was thinking about that at a personal level. And then I suddenly came to Public Enemy, because that's my introduction to activism from a Black perspective, from African-American perspective. So I come to this country on July 4th, believe it or not, in 1986. And, I have this understanding of America sitting in India, that this is the home of the brave. And I live with that, and I appreciated that, because nobody was targeting me and killing me. But within 5 years of getting to college in this country and staying with African Americans, learning about Public Enemy, and this whole fear of the Black planet comes into being. And this whole, at some point, what I started to realize this week as well is I was actually enjoying the white privilege for the first few years. And what was happening was, because there is a model minority myth about Sikhs and Asians at large, as if we are the only hard workers and the smart workers in the world. But the people of color, especially Asian community, must acknowledge, like, I know that I rode that wave because that white privilege was siding with me. And I think this is a time for Sikh community in America, as well as the larger people of color within their South Asian community I'm going to target, who are actually exploiting this and have been exploiting this, to at least acknowledge that we are part of that white privilege, and we need to identify and create allyship with the African American community and the brown communities and the indigenous communities and the LGBTIA plus communities, but we'll focus on the African American for now.
Yeah, this country is built on a settler colonial model. So when people come into it, when people immigrate into it, where are they being assimilated into? And for us, we were really assimilated along the track of whiteness. We weren't assimilating into the Black experience or the indigenous experience of what America is. So.
All right, thank you guys for those thoughts. Let's get into education a little bit, because Corey, you're a teaching policy fellow. We got Harinder here, who's a senior fellow at the Institute. And I was reading your profile just before the podcast, and you're into student leadership development.
Yes.
And so when you see these protests and when you see all the harm that's happening to communities of color, minorities, how do you teach students this? How do you teach students to do the right thing? Because we know there's some wrong things happening, no matter what conspiracies you believe, which I believe in a lot, by the way. But no matter what you believe and who's doing the lootings and things, how do you bring up the next generation to do the right thing and to make sure and, get give them, like Harinder mentioned, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and give those ideas going forward to actually make some basically policy changes and institutional change?
Yeah, there's a saying that I start with in the beginning of my classes: no history, no self; no history, no self. And there's a difference between, each of those. The first one, KNOW; the second one, no, NO. Right. So when we know our history, we have a solid understanding of self. And the function of schools in the United States hasn't been this benevolent, image that I think we believe it to be. And I think again, that goes back to what encouraged me to become an educator, because I was like, oh, well, they keep saying if you have a good education and everything's going to be all right. And that was a false reality, a false narrative that, I had to unlearn very quickly. One of the books that I recommend, because I'm gonna do some reading here. We got homework, y'all. This is a book by Bettina Love. It's called "We Want to Do More Than Survive: Abolitionist Teaching in the Pursuit of Educational Freedom." And I think this book has gotten me to think about, what was the purpose of education as an institution? It was meant, going back to some of the things that Asha mentioned. It's predicated on settler colonialism. It's predicated on white supremacy. I think we have to begin to understand what the function of our education systems were in the United States and how they're continuing to manifest itself. If we're not disrupting that, then we're going to continue to see, some of this problematic ideology, right? One of the reasons why we are seeing, I think, a lot of frustration in schools, especially in public schools, is because they teach compliance. They teach survival. They don't teach people to dream. They don't teach people to imagine, right? I have so many students who are just like, I'm tired of school. I don't want to do this. I don't want to read this book, right? So we have to stop, putting this idea out there that young folks are going to save us. Oh, we got to do work too. And we have to work with young folks. I was really excited to have Asha join on this call, because I think this speaks to the volume of what this intergenerational relationship is. As much as Asha may have learned from me as a sophomore in high school, I've learned as much and more from Asha while Asha was a student in my class and in the years after, right?
You're the first teacher that let me present on Sikh issues in class. When our textbook explicitly said that Sikhs were a part of Hinduism. Wow. Our textbook explicitly said that. And I got upset, and you said, well, why don't you teach the class for the day? That was life-changing for me. So.
Yeah, and I was learning.
Harinder, I liked what he said about compliance and disruption, because I definitely feel that about public schools. They're just having you sit at a desk, do what the teacher tells you, and then you go to your job and you sit at a cubicle and you do what your boss tells you for the next 30, 40 years. So it kind of goes together. And I know you're trying to change that too with your with all the stuff you do at the Institute with compliance and disruption. So give me the Sikh angle towards this.
Well, let me actually build on this education piece, which Corey was mentioning. And I think we have education and literacy and degrees confused. And this is so much true in the South Asian community, which Sikhs are, the large part of the Sikh community is part of the South Asian community in that sense. Because, we get our degrees and we get a license to experience that privilege, because you end up living in a particular zip codes then. That's what it translates to. So I think this is where Guru Nanak comes in, the founder of SikhRI, right? Where he says, "Ahran mat ved hathiyar." That literally, he says, the ultimate weapon to carry with you is knowledge. And education has always been about, can we do the right knowledge transfer so you can confront and address what is happening in front of you? So in sciences, there is a disruption is always welcomed. In technology, disruption is always welcomed. But we are not welcoming disruptions in social sciences or culture, or how structural problem of policing, things of that nature. This thing about kids and the agency development and kids getting bored, and I hear the same things as well. But I think there is something else which we can offer there, which essentially is, it's an additive thing. I'm agreeing with you, Corey. And the additive thing is that, we actually are not allowing them to disrupt our own households thinking as well. And this is where Guru Nanak is important, because he did not follow the way of his dad, you know and just because I did it that way, this is how I survived or how I thrived, does not mean that's what my son or daughter wants to do, and does not mean this is what the whole community wants to do. In fact, when we don't allow that within our own household, within our own organizations, within our own communities, then you are actually not allowing even a possibility of a structural change. And I'm going to leave it at that, but I do want to mention one Sikh correlation here, because to me, it's important that Sikhs and the South Asians understand this. We are sitting here with all our rights today because of what happened in 1960s and what African American community delivered from a civil rights angle. None of us did anything for that. None of us did anything for that. So, we ride not just the white privilege, we also ride the civil rights movement's privileges granted to us as minorities. And I think it's time we actually work with all communities, here specifically with African American community, because everything they have done for us is how we have our rights in this country.
Yeah. I want to add two things to that. When you were talking about like the disruption of knowledge systems, and I think one of the things that has been central to our education is just centering Western beliefs, Western ideologies. And there are many ways of knowing and being and existing that have been erased from our education systems.
Yeah, but I'll add in, and I would like Asha to add in from her perspective, but I want to add in one thing. I think you just brought a word which is talked about in each community, this assimilation. And I'm one of the proponents of, we need to have, if we have to go back to learn from the African American experience in 1850s and 1860s, do we want to assimilate or do we want to integrate? Because there is, America's stereotypes about melting pots and salad bowls and the mosaic or the orchestra. I've heard all those analogies, but assimilation is not the answer. And assimilation is what keeps getting demanded by each generation, including within the communities, including within the Sikh community many a time. And I think the answer more is integration, which requires more nuancing, which is how do we add to the existing culture, the existing norms, rather than accepting the norms which are being thrown upon us.
I think I've noticed, this is kind of a very prevalent narrative that, we get the cause, but it's too dangerous. There's too many consequences to doing what's right and speaking up. But that should make us question, what is the social contract we've agreed to? And why do we have to do this at this cost? So it's interesting, you hear people who are urging, oftentimes because of hierarchical authority in families, their children not to rock the boat, not to go do that because they're scared for you. They have a fear that there will be backlash. So that's an admission that the system is broken, because to do the right thing has these consequences. So I think it's time to throw the whole contract out then, assimilation it's violent. It comes at a cost, and people are admitting that when they're speaking to their kids in this way. It's right there. The truth exists whether people want to accept it or not. And that's something Sikhi has taught me. The truth is there. It's real, it's tangible. It's whether or not people are ready to face it.
Yeah. I wanted to add to that, because I actually don't even know if I want to be a part of this like additive narrative to what the United States is, because that additive narrative has never included me in it. It never once was supposed to do that. In order for this nation to have existed, it was predicated on stolen lands, broken treaties of indigenous people, and the labor of what the United States is in Western ideas has created as Black people. Like, just there's so much that I think has to be thrown out. I'm in favor of just throwing the contract out, starting over again. That's just me. I would hope that there are other folks that realize that that truth that Asha was speaking about.
And we're seeing positions that have never been taken seriously on a broad level being brought to the front of the conversation. Finally, the conversation now is about like radical defunding, which was not taken seriously a few years ago, and I think Minneapolis changed that.
Well, Minneapolis changed that, and to change the conversation.
Yeah,
We will see how much Keith Ellison is allowed to do, even as an attorney general,
that's true.
as a Black man, as a Muslim man who's working under a particular system, right? And so you work with the system to bring changes. In fact, this is where I would, I hear both Asha and Corey, both of you, on what you are saying about throwing the social contract. But this is not how governance works. The governance is you still got to continue with life, because something else might get thrown onto us another week. Maybe there is a trade war. Maybe there is next level of disease. So we still have to have some governance. I think in that governance is what I would say, that we need to push the envelope. This is what I have learned, that the activist needs to keep pushing and keep asking for resetting, or not even a renegotiation, but redrafting of things. But at the same time, the changes come in structures when you do push for that from outside, and then people on the inside are looking at that, are understanding that, and they still have to govern and still not create chaos, still got to provide safeties. And how do you bring the structural sea change within it through the policies?
There's an acknowledgement of the multiplicity of identities that we bring to the table. However, I feel like when we begin to put a limit on what we believe is possible, then we stop dreaming and we stop imagining.
No, Corey, so no, not at all. I'm not saying we put a limit to dreaming. I'm saying what is implementable and become real, right? And this is where I was saying, what's the alternative? If you have nothing, we have chaos. So what I'm saying is we must understand and dream big, but that doesn't mean that's the only component of the reality change. Because and this is where I think we need to also understand not just the white man's burden, because there is white consciousness. I don't mean in the white supremacy sense, but in terms of this burden sense, just like there's an allyship needed there as well. And I see this in other countries, in what needed to happen in South Africa, what is still waiting to happen in India with so many communities, that once you have allyship with part of the community which has been in privilege, and those parts you work with in order to bring these changes is what I'm after. But we have a cosmos and an ecosystem of multiple communities.
I think what I had heard, at least initially, in some of what you were saying earlier, is like a pragmatism about the reality, which I think is important to acknowledge. But I guess I was hoping that in that pragmatism we didn't lose sight of how we can dream big and how things actually can change with the quickness. Like literally, we saw countries shut down. We've never seen countries shut down, and that happened overnight. So to think that something isn't necessarily possible or pragmatic, like how are we going to close schools? Well, they closed schools for 2 months during the school year. We still have to be pragmatic, but we can also dream big, and make sure that in our dreaming big, and I am taking this from my advisor, my mentor, Shireen, we got to plan for the day after the revolution.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is, in fact, this is where I wanted to end up with. It is all about being prepared to do 100% change, but that preparedness requires a lot of work. It actually requires us to have the alternatives ready.
Yeah.
Alternatives, I say, because you don't know, when the decisions are being made, so all these movements create a space so you can sit on the table as an equal partner when decisions are being made. But if you're not there and not prepared, then we lose opportunity of a generation as well.
People, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. People been ready.
People been ready, I think, in terms of responses and in terms of anger, in terms of demanding change. And I think we need some of the policymakers. For example, we just heard from a former president as well, right? Of Barack Obama. And he was a president for 8 years. And within 2 years in office, how many changes he was able to bring in? Not much. So once you are in the system, this pragmatism, the restrictions or preparedness, the allyship, carrying, the white privilege with you, all those become very, very real. And that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
So now we have a space where this has never happened, that with the exception of few white men who are all the president's men, other white men in positions of power are saying things which you have never heard before.
Right.
I think this is a moment to actually go ask for those regulations and those policy changes.
We can mobilize in ways that we need to around local elections, right? I think that is one of the biggest areas that we are, slacking, because those are the folks who are making policy, the folks that are out here, destroying these big capitalist businesses are doing. It's disruption. It's saying, if you're not paying attention to my life, I know you're going to pay attention to, the money, because that apparently has more value to you. So we're going to go for those things until you wake up and start paying attention to the fact that my life is here and that my life matters.
And
that element.
I was going to say, on the flip side, you kind of see how threatened a lot of law enforcement is by people serving each other. I mean, if you guys saw the videos out of Asheville where the police totally destroyed a city approved medic tent, or this community care is being perceived as a threat. So that kind of puts a mirror to what we're looking at here.
Right, and I think there are many dimensions to that. From a perspective of, again, I'm going to come back to what I would like to share with the Sikh community when they are trying to do and look at all these things, to not allow any one or few incidents to create noises, to not understand the larger issue. Because what happens is the macro view gets lost, and this is how you get digressed from the larger issue. And I say this about 1984, and I correlate with that. What one Sikh or few Sikhs did does not justify the act of the state, which was on the whole community. So I think those incidents teach us many things. They teach us about psychological traumas as well, attentions and things of that nature. But at the same time, the larger issue is very, very clear. There is no denying of that. When the Rush Limbaughs of the world end up saying what happened in Minneapolis is unacceptable, that should tell you something. That incident has created, again, they might not agree to some of the policy changes, but something on a video got captured where, and this is important, where the Asian community and the Arab community and the Muslim community also is forced to think about, when we say that we want to be allowed to serve in the police academies or join the police academy or the US Armed Forces, do you also realize what you are becoming? Or are you going to also become one of the change agents within that industry, where you get to become that white, what the corporate world now calls people who are the wipe checkers? It's, will you invoke what the justice element is, or will you just invoke the code, because codes have been compromised?
So I know this conversation could go on for a long time. I'm enjoying it very much. But quickly, since we're running out of time, so everyone's coming together in America for this. People are protesting, people are praying. What could we do now to go beyond protest and prayer? And Corey, I want you to answer this first. I loved what Killer Mike, he came on like the next day or something like that, and he's like, vote, just go vote, and vote the people you don't like and who do this to you out of office. So is voting the next thing? Is that what we need to get the next movement going, to people to vote these people out?
I mean, I think it's a really complicated, it's a complicated thing. What are the next steps? To solely say vote, um, without really talking about voter suppression or the fact that a majority of our voting electorate is white, and that our voting systems are really set up to privilege the stability of the current system. Like when we look at gerrymandering policies, when we look at how particular votes matter more in certain areas. Like for example, if you look at Senate, Senate isn't really going to shift and change unless folks move. I'm not planning on moving to Nebraska to increase, some just non-Republican votes out there. I think it's so much more complicated than that. Voting becomes a part of it, but really, what I think we need is this continuation. We're seeing a lot of people now, a week and a half after this, that are up in arms. But what's going to happen in a month from now? Who's going to be tired? I don't get to be tired because this is my reality. So what I would want people to do is continue to make noise, right? We just can't afford to let this particular momentum die.
And I think thinking about those levels we were talking about earlier, like what are you going to read and reflect on yourself? What are 2-3 organizations in your immediate area that are doing work? And then you can get into the bigger stuff. And even with voting, okay, what about your local elections? Think about those. What are the policies on the table there? And voting on a national level that's kind of the highest level element, but it has to come with all these other things. And to Corey's point, how are you going to involve yourself in fair voting policies in your immediate area? Because that's also where the local has a big impact in kind of rectifying a lot of those issues. But I really encourage people to look into organizations in their area, and those organizations will help carry you when you get tired or lost, or we need to build momentum. And it doesn't have to be obvious stuff. It can be, there's a lot of organizations trying to feed people, that may not be directly tied, but it actually is completely integral to the systems that we're facing and the systems of violence that are trying to be undone.
So I hear that it's very complex and there is no one thing which can be done, but I'm going to actually address the Sikh audience here more, people who are listening to this. It's really, to me, the word is allyship at this time for us. And I'm going to invoke Sikhi into it. We are constantly taught by the founder of the faith that we exist here, and to us, in this existence on this earth is about identifying with underprivileged and people with no privileges. So people who are downtrodden, people whose rights are being violated. And we are actually told that you will only experience grace when you identify with them. So you become the partners with them in order to elevate their rights and their dignities and their freedoms. With that in mind, our dictum is very clear. We are supposed to use all 3 means available to us. So to the Sikh community in America, I would say, and globally, including those who are sitting in Punjab and want to identify with this, it's very simple. Use all the intellect you have, depending on if you are a lawyer to a technologist to people who run aid and relief work. Use all your intellect, all your physical strength, and all your money, and a portion of that needs to go towards Black Lives Matter or similar campaigns. They can be from a legal angle, they can be from supporting the Black arts. New York Met put out a statement, but they have never had a performance by a Black composer. So, there are things like that which need to change. So what I'm saying is we need to take part of the swand, the 10% we give, and we need to spend part of that 10% right now, intellectually, physically by showing up, intellectually by contributing, and monetarily by supporting things which will help bring not just hope, but some sort of a change in policies in America.
I appreciate everybody's time today. Harinder, Asha, thanks for coming on. Corey, thanks for being on this podcast. We really appreciate your thoughts and insights into what's happening in America today. And hopefully we'll talk again soon. So thank you guys. Thanks for being here.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you.
Stay strong.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sean, and I'm the content producer here with SikhRI. I think it's fair to say all of us at the Sikh Research Institute have been looking at the situation in the States, and have been doing a lot of reflecting. There's one moment in this episode that especially sticks out to me. It was when Harinder Singh said this.
Use all your intellect, all your physical strength, and all your money, and a portion of that needs to go towards Black Lives Matter or similar campaigns. They can be from a legal angle, they can be from supporting the black arts. We need to take part of, or the SWAN, the 10% we give, and we need to spend part of the 10% right now.
It's in that spirit that we would like to share a piece of music that's sort of become a rallying cry for the whole Black Lives Matter movement right now. It's a short song, sung by 12-year-old Keedron Bryant, written by his mother Janetta Bryant, from Jacksonville, Florida. It's called I Just Want to Live. Have a listen.
I'm a young black man doing all that I can to stand. Oh, but when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind, every day I'm being hunted as prey. My people don't want no trouble. We've had enough struggle. I just wanna live. God protect me. I just wanna live. I just wanna live.
You are listening to Sikh Cast by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.